Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today we also got another devblog for the SACLOS and MCLOS missiles and basically changing the flight physics of them. Now this is actually something that was talked about when it came to the dev Q&A the other day, but the actual talking about them was not specifically about these ones, but about other missiles. But it looks like they're trying their best to implement the physical qualities and the physics behind them as realistically as possible when it comes to ground forces. They've done a lot of work over the years when it comes to air forces and their air-to-air missiles, and it seems like they're taking a few of those ideas and implementing them in ground forces. Generally, when it comes to SACLOS and MCLOS missiles, what you'll find in War Thunder is that they don't really handle realistically when it comes to in terms of maneuvering through the air. They don't lose, or they don't seem to, I should say, lose a lot of energy while changing trajectory, which is something which is not true when it comes to real life, and also something which definitely is not true when it comes to the air-to-air missiles in the game itself. So what I'm going to do is read this verbatim, because I think they actually go through it a lot better than I do, or could do, and explain it incredibly well in this devblog, and then we'll talk about it. So, for missiles of this type, they're talking about SACLOS and MCLOS, we clarified the available load of the missile depending on the flight speed and air density. In addition, the missile will lose speed more accurately during maneuvers. These changes will allow us to realize more accurately the damage zone of this type of missile in accordance with those of their real prototypes. As a consequence to all this, there will be a noticeable reduction in the capability of SACLOS SAMs to engage high-speed targets with altitude or heading parameters. Since missiles with such control types follow the line of sight throughout the flight trajectory, when firing at targets with with altitude and heading parameters, the missile trajectory curves due to changes in target position, and the missile will have to perform a maneuver with an ever-increasing overload. So basically, as the target gets closer, and the missile itself will have to arc. And because it has to arc, it has to use basically more overload as it goes up, eventually I suppose exponentially, if you want to have a look at it like that. The diagram actually puts it in a pretty good way, and because it does that, it uses more energy to do so, therefore it gets less and less efficient and effective as it goes along. So it will be harder to be able to track targets as the arc gets greater. Such a trajectory leads to a high GeForce requirement throughout the flight, which combined with the trajectory velocity decrease may cause the target to be missed if there is not enough available GeForce. Therefore, the higher the target velocity and the higher its heading or altitude, the more difficult it is for the missile to hit the target. This feature of the flight of SACLOS missiles will become more pronounced after the update of the physical model, and pilots will be able to use it to avoid being hit by SAMs. To do so, we recommend maintaining high speed and a significant altitude or heading parameter. Also, if the physical model of the SACLOS MCLOS is updated, the missile's angle of attack due to gravity compensation by the missile guidance system will become more noticeable. The angle of attack in the updated physics model will vary depending on the missile's velocity, and the angle of attack during the flight would slightly change the armor engagement angle of these weapons. So now, many more factors are going to come into if these missiles are more effective. SAMs will be a lot less effective when this is implemented, just because at the level that the SAMs are at, planes are generally going pretty fast. Obviously, you know, a lot of planes going near Mach 1 when they're dropping their ordnance nowadays at the highest echelons of the game, and in order for the missile to compensate for that and the guidance systems compensate for that, it's going to have to use a hell of a lot more power to be able to get the missile around with this new system, and that's going to be a bit of a pain. So lining them up at longer distances is going to be very important to make sure the guidance system can compensate for these specific issues. And then they even put a glossary in, which I think is wonderful, so people can understand it. So the SACLOS is a semi-automatic command command to line of sight, basically a mouse-guided ATGM in the game, or an AGM. ATGM, I should say, or a SAM. And then the MCLOS is the manual command to line of sight. That is the keyboard controlled one. The target heading parameter is the shortest distance perpendicular to the point, origin of coordinates, location of instrument and cannon and launcher, relative to which it is determined, to the projection of the target's course on a horizontal plane. And once again, they give a good diagram. There was 3 instances in the developer Q&A that BVVD actually goes through a lot of these values and how they all work and how they're going to be implemented. And for me, it is really interesting to hear stuff like that. When it comes to the field of work that I'm in, it heavily involves much of the sciences, and also I have a degree when it comes to physics and also chemistry. And one of the things which at least is really interesting to see in War Thunder is how these systems, even if they aren't very realistic now, will eventually become realistic. Their idea is to try and implement all of these systems as realistically as possible, and the amount of factors that they have to compensate for and the amount of factors they have to look at is actually pretty impressive when you think about the amount of work they're putting in. And, a lot of people critique War Thunder for many things, when it comes to bugs, when it comes to their ahistorical nature, when it comes to all sorts of things. But when you look at devblogs like this, it is very hard to turn around and not appreciate the amount of effort they're putting in to try and make this as realistically as possible. There is not many teams out there when it comes to video games that want to replicate this as realistic as possible. Generally, after speaking with game devs or watching game devs talk about these things at conferences, generally the ways that they look at things is trying to find easy way outs, or trying to find ways which make sense realistically, but maybe are not modeled the complete correct way as long as it works in the game. Whereas here, you can see a dedication to the idea of modeling it realistically and also making it as good as possible. It may take a long time to do this. ATGMs and SAMs were introduced in the game a very long time ago, but eventually it'll happen. And that's kind of the tagline of War Thunder, I feel like. Is there something you want to see? Is it realistic, or is it historical? Well, it's more of a when instead of an if nowadays. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd just like to thank Professor X 1718, Orange Tail, Sakoshi Tiger, BRFC 15, Teddy, John Ryman, Universe A, Eugens Terry, Ambrosius McClellan, Daniel Stanton, Martinez, B. Young, and then Kyle Kin, Barine, Lafouche, and also Samuel Slick for supporting the channel.